Administration's new 3-point plan to gain independence through the next general election, presumably. Now, I've read through this several times, and I've read through the 3 points several times, and all of them seem to be the same single point, which basically says vote for the SNP and we'll have a pro-independence government and everything will be fine. The other thing that's emphasised in the so-called 3 points, which is really just 1 point, is that voting for the SNP will produce or will raise the number of people who are in favour of independence by talking to them about the advantages of it and trying to convert them. Now, if this sounds familiar, it's because it's exactly the same policy that the SNP pursued in 2014, which brought us close to the brink of achieving independence in 2014. And I don't want to lessen that. I don't want to reduce the actual effects that had. But that was a very different time when everything was stacked against us. There was no other way at that point in time of voting for independence. And so we had this once and done referendum, which the United Kingdom almost lost. And were so frightened by that, and so frightened by the fact that they came close to losing Scotland, that they never again will ever give another Section 30 order. But that is exactly what Mr. Swinney's 3-point plan appears to be saying, that by voting for an SNP administration and by raising the amount of people who want independence, this will put immense pressure on the United Kingdom to just cave in, give us another referendum which we can then win and everybody's happy. But we all know that's not going to happen, because we know that the United Kingdom is not going to allow that. And in Mr. Swinney's speech, he never once outlined any methodology for achieving independence. There was just this vague hint that by supporting the SNP and returning a massive majority of pro-independence, presumably SNP MSPs, both in the first vote and in the list, that magically this would make things happen in some vague nebulous way that he couldn't define. And this lack of definition and this nebulous guesswork and these promises are precisely what has been given to us before every single general election for the last 3 election cycles. We've had 2 administrations of Nicola Sturgeon where this happened, and now we've got Mr. Swinney going for a second term. Now, whilst on the face of it, it might appear that we don't have any choice in the matter because the SNP is the largest party standing candidates in the first vote, because none of the smaller parties have got enough money and enough heft and enough weight to do the same thing and to challenge them. That means that the only place, or at least mostly the only place, where the SNP might see some competition for seats would be on the list vote. So does it make any difference really how we vote next year? Well, I would argue that probably it makes no difference whatsoever. We will get exactly the same thing again. We will get a slim majority for the SNP, maybe, or more likely, given the fact that people are so switched off, that there won't be a big enough turnout for the SNP to maintain its grip on all the seats it currently has in the constituencies. Now, that's a prediction that I'm making, that they will lose some of their support in the first vote. I believe they will definitely lose a lot more support in the second or list vote. And that might allow some of the smaller parties, such as ALPA, such as the ISP, Scottish Socialists, and others who are effectively allying themselves under a single banner to get a few seats. But it's not really going to move the dial at all, unfortunately. It can't really move the dial, simply because there aren't enough alternative parties, or a big enough alternative party, to seriously challenge the domination of the SNP. So unfortunately, the SNP is probably just going to win. Nothing's really going to change. We're not going to be any better off, but we're probably not going to be much worse off politically. Economically, it's a different story. If we remain part of the Union much longer, we're going to see a lot more things being taken away from us and either moved to England or used in England or cabled or piped to England to support its economy. Now, somebody pointed out recently that the big British announcement of so-called electricity superhighways, these are the cables which will connect Scotland's renewable energy arrays in the northeast of Scotland and some in the west coast with parts of England. They're not really highways. A highway is a two-way road. Now, in this case, it's not a highway at all. This is a one-way street, where Scotland's renewable electricity flows only southwards towards England. It cannot flow the opposite way because England does not produce enough of it to supply us. And because we are overflowing with energy and we don't need it, that system is simply a one-way street. It's just basically like putting a huge pipe into a reservoir of power and letting it drain away to the south. Does Scotland see anything for this? No. It can't, because all of this power is being generated by companies and it is not controlled by Scotland or its government or its people. It should be, because the energy is supplied from our own domestic energy fields. That'd be tidal energy, offshore wind and so on, and onshore wind as well. All of these things, that energy that's created in Scotland really should be metered and should be charged a royalty on every kilowatt hour which goes south or out of our grid system. However, that doesn't happen. The grid system is privatised. It's connected to another privatised grid system in England, none of which are under our control. So there's nothing we can do about that either. So next year, after this general election, we may have an SNP government. It might be a vastly reduced government. It might have to go into an alliance with somebody else in order to survive, and this energy drain will accelerate. It will accelerate dramatically because that's always been the plan. England wants that energy, needs it desperately. It does not have enough capacity to generate for itself, and its population is growing, whilst our population is gradually contracting because not enough children are being born here, and immigration, which would be useful to us, is not under our control. So all this being said, we're basically back to square one. Now, mentioning superhighways reminds me of one good piece of news. Well, it will be a good piece of news in about 10 years, and that is the SNP has basically, I suppose it's actually agreed now that it will dual the remaining parts of the A9 between Perth and Inverness. Now, there are many stretches of the A9 which are fast dual carriageway, but there are also equally a large number of stretches which are two-way with a 60-mile-per-hour speed limit as in a conventional road. So 10 years it will take to fully dual the A9, but the SNP is saying it's committing resources to doing that, which is good news. It's just very long range good news. It's not going to be achieved until 2035. Now, the last item on today's programme took an interesting twist recently. I've been having conversations with a source, a new source to me, who in his last communication with me revealed that he is a personal friend of Jeremy Corbyn. Now, this is a person who lives in Scotland, who appears to support self-determination and possibly independence, but is a close friend of Jeremy Corbyn's and believes that Corbyn's new party, when it launches in Scotland, might be a good thing. Now, his reasoning is that there are a large number of very disaffected Scottish Labour voters who are really annoyed with Keir Starmer and betraying the socialist underpinnings and foundations of the Labour Party. So the argument goes that this new Corbyn party, whatever he calls it, if it opens a branch in Scotland, may attract a lot of disaffected Labour voters who would then join this new party. According to the opening few statements made by spokespersons for this new party, which doesn't exist yet, they claim that the party will support Scotland's right to self-determination. Now, that is an interesting statement on its own, because basically what they're saying is that Corbyn's new party would support Scotland's right to vote about independence. It appears to be staying neutral on the issue of whether Scotland should be independent or not. But if true, and if this party does that, and if it does attract a large flood of members from what used to be Scottish Labour into this new party, then that might move the dial somewhat in terms of pro-independence support in Scotland. Now, it's already known, and it's been known probably for about 4 or 5 years, that approximately 40% of Labour Party members in Scotland actually support independence. And if that's the case, and that 40% migrates to this new Corbyn party, that is going to weaken Anas Sarwar's position dramatically. He would lose seats to them. And that is only, of course, if Corbyn's new party stands candidates at the Holyrood election. But Corbyn's new party, if it emerges before the next general election in Holyrood and actually stands candidates here, is going to divide, to some degree, the pro-independence voting intentions of Scots. Because those Labour stalwarts who have been uncomfortable with the way the Scottish Labour Party has gone and want to support the right to have a referendum could migrate to this party. But it still leaves them largely sitting on the fence until the day that there is some kind of referendum. Now, whilst this all seems desperately sad, frustrating and annoying for most of us, the one thing I would remind you about is that whilst Salvo and Liberation.Scot have been campaigning and launching their campaign for Scotland to be recognised for decolonisation at the UN, it hasn't started yet. The notification of intent to apply for decolonisation status has been delivered, and that was the first step which Craig Murray actually reported on when he returned from the UN. There's another step to be taken, which will be the presentation of arguments, both historical, factual, political, the rest of it, and economic, for Scotland to be classified as a non-governing territory, in other words, a non-self-governing territory of the UK. In other words, we have no real political control over what a country does, and it's governed by another state, which is true. Now, if that is established, and I don't see any reason why it couldn't be, but assuming that the UN agrees and says, yep, Scotland should be listed for decolonisation, and we're going to change our position on Scotland's political status, that does severely swing the dial towards independence, because then we have international recognition saying that Scotland does have a right to decide whether it stays in the Union or not, and it doesn't need to ask permission of the governing state, i.e. England. In fact, it has to do it without their permission. Once that is achieved, whoever is in government in Holyrood, whatever politicians are governing the country from 2026 onwards, then have the legal right to hold a referendum of any kind they like. And they don't need to involve England, and they don't need to prove how much support there is for it. There just needs to be substantial support, even minority support, doesn't matter, as long as there is a reason to do it and the government has the right to do it under the UN's reclassification of Scotland as a non-self-governing territory. So I am optimistic, despite this long period of inactivity and political fluff coming out of the mouth of John Swinney. Things may change, and they will definitely change if we get this UN ruling. Now, a lot of you are saying, well, what if we don't get a UN ruling? What if it fails? There's nothing left. There's always something left, and there's always something left because if you elect a series of politicians who form a government which decide that they are going to start negotiating with the UK to liberate Scotland, to separate it from the UK, that could still happen. There would need to be a confirmatory ballot of the people after that started, and once they knew what the actual result of negotiations were going to be. In other words, once the people of Scotland could see what the UK government and the Scottish government had agreed to would be the actual offer, what the independence of Scotland would look like. In that way, you could then vote on it knowing full well exactly what you're going to get. You know, what parts or assets that Scotland owns that it would get back, how much of a percentage of those it would be entitled to, and if any payments were required to be made to settle any outstanding debts, then they would be part of that agreement. Now, I would argue that becoming independent means you don't have any debts because we're not allowed to borrow, but that's something which negotiators would need to deal with. However, there are always opportunities, but the biggest one of all is the United Nations changing our classification from being a part of a voluntary union where we have presumably equal influence over the United Kingdom's government, which we obviously don't, to a non-self-governing territory of England, because it's not really a United Kingdom, it's England and Scotland combined to create a new England with Scotland added to the British Crown. So all of these things are going to be proved in the coming arguments to the UN. Once that's done and the UN changes its mind and we get the support of other UN members, then the gloves can come off. Right at the moment, Swinney is just babbling. He's just coming up with pre-election promises and pledges which do not push the boundaries of independence any further. The dial will not move. He knows it. He's just simply asking for us to vote for him so that we have continuity and we don't have a pro-union government. A pro-union government would be awkward, there's no question about it. And when it comes to thinking about who you're going to vote for, most of us, and I think most of us would probably say the same thing, unless you're very anti-SNP, they're probably going to vote for an SNP candidate in their constituency first, and then look at the best candidates from the smaller parties in the second vote, and vote for ALPA or ISP or SSP or whoever is standing candidates on the list in your area, in your region. And in that way we will still get a pro-independence government. And also SNP stalwarts who want to use both their votes for SNP will still be able to do so, but I would predict that fewer of them will do it because they know the arithmetic of the d'Hondt system in the second vote will definitely reduce the odds of getting an SNP member from that vote. So having said all of that, so long as we don't change our voting patterns too much, nothing much will change. We will maintain our position for the next 4 or 5 years whilst things are ongoing at the UN. At the UN, once the process starts, it takes approximately 2 years to get through it, maybe 3 if it's moving slowly. But Scotland is such an easy case to argue, and it's such a buoyant, self-sufficient place already that there would be no real reason why Scotland couldn't be an independent country right from the word go, as soon as it declares itself independent. And I think the UN would realise that very quickly. Anyway, that's about all I have to say today. I'm sorry it's a bit negative, but right at the moment we are in the middle of a pregnant political pause where nothing is happening. The parties are manoeuvring for position in a conventional general election run under British rules, which make it almost impossible for us to get an overall SNP majority. Having said that, Samad was the only man in the history of the new British administration at Holyrood who actually broke the system and managed to get a full majority. That probably will never happen again. It certainly will not happen under Mr. Swinney. In the meantime, vote for whoever you like, but remember that our hopes don't rest on the next general election. They rest on what happens at the UN and what that will enable our future politicians to be able to do. As usual, keep the faith, and I'll see you in the next few days. But we should have some more information about Corbyn's party soon from this new source, probably sometime after the 25th of this month. I'm working on setting up a meeting with this individual so we can discuss this. He claims to have some information which is vital to the independence cause, and I'm interested to hear what that is. Once I know what it is, I'll be able to pass it on to the rest of us. Anyway, in the meantime, as I say, keep the faith, but I'm working in the background trying to find out some more information about what this Corbyn party is all about and what this vital information might actually be. I'll see you soon. Bye for now.